Besant laid out the plan in the most articulate fashion to everybody. And it's the plan we've been talking about here. If you've been listening, if you didn't hear Besant and you can't find it, just go back on our podcast, because Besant laid it out. He said we're gonna go through some periods where we got to cut the public sector, and those people are going to lose jobs. We're going to feel that, but we're bringing in a lot of capital. We got a tax policy that's going to bring in a lot of capital and the private sector. And we're talking about organic growth. This is the kind of growth you want to see. You don't want to borrow and for growth, and you don't want to inflate for growth. You want the private sector to risk for growth. And I think that's the key word here. If risk has become a dirty word to a generation of people out there, they think profit and risk is a dirty word. But I mean, when I used to give the presentations in front of the stock exchange, I would say, anybody here would like lobster? And everybody would raise their hand. And I would say, what about the first guy who ate a lobster? I mean, he walked in, he pulled this insect out of the water, and he ate it. And now we know that lobster is good, so we could eat it. Risk is good for everybody. When somebody takes a risk and bears risk, he tells us information that we need. And that's what this economy needs. It needs risk takers. And we're setting up a tax code that encourages risk takers. I think it's as simple as that. And we're going to have a little while before the risk takers take.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Markets and Madness. As we say, the place where we discuss the madness that occurs when economics, politics, and personalities all move in different directions. We've had a lot of new viewers, first-time viewers over the last couple of weeks, and I say this all the time. If you find anything that we say remotely interesting, please hit the subscribe button. Let us know what you think. Ring the bell, get some new content. We have been getting some good comments from folks. We do appreciate it. So with that said, we have a guest with us today who's been with us several times, Matt Lifson. Matt, it's RASA Economics, right? That's
RASA Consulting.
RASA Consulting. Okay. Matt has been with Tim and I, worked on and off with both of us over the years in the FX markets. He spent some time as a professor, and now he's doing his consulting work on the economics front. Then Tim's with us. Good morning, everyone. How's everybody doing today?
Hey, gang. Hello, Matt.
Good stuff. All right. So, Tim and I have had this idea that we're going to live through some pain. And it seems like we're living through it. And back in Phil, I read something this morning, and I thought it was a very well-written point that the markets are too low to sell and not low enough to buy. I think we're going lower. I think we still have more of a correction on the big Dow, S&P, NASDAQ. I think we have more room to the downside. But what are your thoughts?
I think with the Dow and with NASDAQ and S&P, I mean, they got a little bit concerning last week when the S&P and Dow and NASDAQ went into a consolidation mode, but they came back. They came back, and as we were saying just before we went on air, the Dow seems to have strong support in the 38,000 level, and so right up there. The one thing that I would just want to mention, and maybe we'll talk about this after we get to the stocks, it just popped into my head. Gasoline prices down here in Tennessee went from $2.54 a gallon for regular to $2.89 overnight, and I've been looking and trying to find out what's going on. And I everything I read about oil, it seems to be things are okay with the peace talks and this and that and the other thing. I don't know if it has anything to do with the striking, with the the airstrikes in Yemen. But after we get over the stock market, maybe Tim, you can come up with some ideas of why this happened. But I think stocks are in a trading range right now. I don't think there's anything. I do agree with you. You don't want to buy anything right here because oops, you get the oops result. Markets are still waiting to see what happens. We started off on a scale of 1 to 10 with tariffs at 10, if you will, and 10 being the worst case scenarios. And now I think they're drifting down to the 5 and 6 levels. As expected, the administration is pulling back a little bit and giving people a little more confidence. But
Let's see what happens April 2nd. I mean, that's supposed to be the drop dead date, right?
Look, I've been convinced for many years now that we live in a giant Jerry Springer show, and and I think the aliens got to be looking at us, from space, saying, "Hey, Gorf, take a look at this. They're burning Teslas now." You know. Oh no, I'm still watching the guy in the red dress who's in charge of nuclear waste. No, change. Watch this show. I mean, this. We live in such a strange society, and I think it's amusing that we try to predict markets when people are so. Who would have imagined that they'd be firebombing Teslas or stopping people in the middle of the road, telling you sell your Nazi car? I mean, we're in a place. I've said to Freddie so many times, if you believe that it's perfectly fine to eat children under the age of 3 years old, you can go to some website and find 50,000 people that believe it too. Hey, look, they're boiling Chinese kids today. I mean, it's really
No, you're
just
right.
so bizarre, and we try to impart sanity on an insane world. So this crazy group is growing.
The divide has gotten greater. I mean, the divide has widened, and you know, I talk to people and I get the same comments that the political divide that we have in this country right now, and that's why they're burning Teslas and that's why they're doing all kinds of, is not going to be fixed in our lifetime. I mean, the three of us are, quote unquote, senior citizens. We're active. We still keep track of everything, but in terms of age, it's not going to be. We're talking 10, 15, 20 years, and this still is going to go on. If you speak about common sense, if you speak common sense wise, somebody's going to attack you. One side or the other, somebody's going to attack you.
Yeah, it's a sad state on the overall place where we live, and it's not just the U.S. It's globally. You go to London, it's they're crazy. You go into Europe, they're crazy. But we're seeing things change globally. We had Alex on last week. Spends a lot of time in Brazil and Argentina, and he's saying Argentina is making a rapid change. A lot of things are changing for the better in Argentina. People don't believe what they used to believe 5 years ago. They're buying into it. They're buying into the fix. So
Well, that's
let's
a good
hope
thing,
it
right?
translates. Yeah. We talked earlier about too low to sell, too low to buy. I'm Matt. I know you watch a lot of sports. I've been watching a lot also. And I'm seeing for the first time in a long time Starbucks commercials. You notice that?
Yes, yes.
And led me to believe that Starbucks is in trouble. So I thought yesterday, maybe I'll take a look at buying some Starbucks puts. 52-week high of 117, 52-week low of 76 or 78, and it's at 90. So it's another one of those classic examples of too low to sell, right? And not low enough to buy.
This is a time frame trade. You have to select what your time frame is and position yourself accordingly. If you're an investor, it wouldn't be a sin to nibble at a position now, but put a third on or a quarter on and look for better opportunities. I was thinking the other day that when things really got out of hand in my lifetime, which would have been the 70s, the late 70s, when things got really crazy, and Reagan reconstructed the financial world with Volcker. We had some pain, but we had like a 20-year rally. I mean, he set the foundation for good long-term growth. So, if your time frame, if you're like 40 years old, you should be putting some money away for some dollar cost averaging and maybe start to nibble here. If you're 70 or 80 years old, you got to wait a little bit, until this is over and you preserve your capital.
But
It's all about time frames.
looking at Fred's comment about Starbucks, though, okay, so you're looking at 117 and 70, and now you look at the stock and it's at 90. So you say to yourself, what? However, now you look at Tim's scenario, okay, you were intending to invest X, invest 0.25 of X, or invest 0.33 of X. Get in just so you have something, just in case this is the point. You
Well,
don't know if it's
initial premise was that Starbucks is going lower, that we're going into a recession. There's not going to be that disposable income. We were driving around the other day, and all right, let's get a Starbucks. $12 to get two coffees. So that how long is that going to go on if we go into a recession? I look at that stock and say it's having trouble, and they're showing it by the new advertising that they're doing.
well, yeah, and it makes sense. I did read an article just quickly about things with the NCAA. There's always a team that complains that they didn't make the tournament. So if you put 100 teams in the tournament, the 101st team complains and everything. Well, the major broadcast networks and the NCAA have a contract for the next 8 years, CBS and TNT, et cetera. So they're thinking, how can they add more teams and get more revenue? And Starbucks is one of the things. They're getting more commercials from people like Starbucks and putting in, if you watch this, and you'll see it maybe Thursday and Friday if you stop to turn on the game, there's no advertisement on the courts. There's no, like Starbucks can't stick a coffee cup on the court, with their logo. They're going to start to do things like that. And eventually, what happens? They'll put the logo on the uniform.
Like the NHL,
And
right? On
like
the board.
Major League Baseball, it's star something or other. When you watch a Yankee game, the big square star, and I think it's NYU Langone Health or something for the Mets. I'm not sure, but yeah. Are we going into a recession? Again, I don't think you can look at that. I think everything is basically on hold until May, and the reason I use May is I want to get 2 months worth of tariff data. I want to know what CPI is going to look like in April. April CPI, what's it going to look like? I want to see what jobs are going to look like after the tariffs start. We're slashing a lot of jobs.
That's why I think we're having a recession. Yeah.
Well, you got to go back and figure out exactly what Doge is doing and everything like that, and that's why we're blowing up the Teslas. But I think it's hard to predict right now. I think we're sort of in that intermediary point, and your Starbucks comment is perfect. 117 the high, 70 the low. Where's it trading? In the 90s. So everything is just on hold. It's a holding pattern.
Yeah.
And the good thing about your comment, Tim, about the aliens, there's no doubt if aliens are looking down, they're saying, let's get away from this planet and go somewhere else.
We worked with half of them, over the years.
Just imagine how we would trade this market. I know you're involved in some, but think about sitting in a trading room today with all the constraints and everything like that. But think if there was think if Dodd-Frank didn't exist, and we were all sitting in trading rooms right now like we were in the 70s and 80s, slinging around things like that. Think of what we would because we were traders. I mean, people now that are working.
I think that's the difference. We were traders and would be looking where the liquidity pockets were.
Right.
We wouldn't look at macro. I mean, our conversations here for the last 6 months have been regarding macro policies, macro ideas, macro investing, where what we did for the longest time was find liquidity misalignments,
Right.
and exploit them.
I still remember one night at 10 to 5 sitting in the Merrill Lynch trading room, and Westpac Sydney calls up and asks for Aussie in 15 at 10 to 5. And I make them a price. I think Aussie was like 5.10, so I made them 95.05 and pass. So I was 10 to 5. I was going home. I wasn't getting involved. My assistant says to me, what would happen if he traded with us? You'd be working late right now.
That's right.
You
missed the bus.
It doesn't happen anymore.
Well, we existed in a world of democratic markets, and by that I mean you didn't have to be a big player, but you were a market maker, even if it's small, and everybody knew how to make a market, like you just said. I mean, fully 3/4 of our audience, both people.
No, 3/4. You'd have to have 4 people. But
Oh, maybe true. Really didn't get what you just said. I mean, it was 5.15. We thought the market was 5.15. You made 95.05 because the only side you were going to do was on the short side.
Right.
And you knew that the guy was a seller himself. He told you that he was a seller himself when he passed. That's lost on traders today. They're not market makers. People don't really understand what it is to make a market. Market makers have a different view of how to play this thing. You know, your statement was just, I'm very defensive, and 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 I took that to mean, and Freddie, you said how to trade this market. For me, it's either be flat or be short,
Yeah.
because my time frame is no more than 6 weeks and probably less than that. I don't want to live in, sit through a giant drawdown, waiting for a 20-year move. And the rule is the bigger the move, the harder it is to time. So if we think we're facing a big move, and I do because structurally they're making some real changes. By that, did you see the cabinet meeting? I
I
guess it was
didn't. I
yesterday.
just saw the one picture of Elon with the hat that said Trump was right about everything.
I didn't see them. I didn't see the meeting, but I did hear about
Listen,
the email.
Besant laid out the plan in the most articulate fashion to everybody, and it's the plan we've been talking about here. If you've been listening, if you didn't hear Besant and you can't find it, just go back on our podcast, because Besant laid it out. He said we're gonna go through some periods where we got to cut the public sector, and those people are going to lose jobs. We're going to feel that, but we're bringing in a lot of capital. We got a tax policy that's going to bring in a lot of capital and the private sector. And we're talking about organic growth. This is the kind of growth you want to see.
Yeah.
You don't want to borrow and for growth, and you don't want to inflate for growth. You want the private sector to risk for growth. And I think that's the key word here. If risk has become a dirty word to a generation of people out there, they think profit and risk is a dirty word. But I mean, when I used to give the presentations in front of the stock exchange, I would say, anybody here would like lobster? And everybody would raise their hand. And I would say, what about the first guy who ate a lobster? I mean, he walked in, he pulled this insect out of the water, and he ate it. And now we know that lobster is good, so we could eat it. Risk is good for everybody. When somebody takes a risk and bears risk, he tells us information that we need. And that's what this economy needs. It needs risk takers. And we're setting up a tax code that encourages risk takers. I think it's as simple as that. And
Yeah.
we're going to have a little while before the risk takers take over.
Matt, I think your microphone has some hits on it or something.
Hear anything, I can lower it.
Sounds good to me. And Freddie, you're on a
Okay.
delay.
Okay, maybe it's me. All right, sorry
Yeah.
about that. But yes, I agree.
You're talking like it's a Godzilla movie, Freddie.
Yeah, but
Everybody goes, oh, look, it's a Godzilla.
but here's the point. You talk about taking risk, but our financial systems, and especially in banking, I mean, when we look at in terms of like FX trading, it's set up to not take risk. We were set up to take risk. And how did you learn to take risk? Well, you got thrown in, how do you teach a kid to swim? Sometimes you just have to throw them in the water and, let them, make sure you don't drown them.
Yeah, but I think the risk Tim is talking about is not from the guys making markets on the desk. It's from corporations.
But it's the corporations that are afraid to step out now and put their toe in the water. And that's what you're seeing now. Again, I just the way things have folded out, because of this, you would have preferred that if we were going to place tariffs on people, we would have done it immediately. And the only reason I say that is that this way we would have known what the repercussions were from the tariffs. I still believe, and it's March 25th, so we have 7 days. I still believe from the moment he mentioned that word, that was a bargaining ploy. And I still think it's a bargaining ploy. And I've told this to people, and they think some people think I'm smart, and some people think I'm crazy. This whole U.S., Mexican, Canada thing it can be solved very simply. Claudia Sheinbaum, Mark Carney, and Donald Trump go in a room, shut the television cameras off, and figure it out. That's all. Just figure it out. But that's not happening now. All we keep on hearing is 51st state and this and that and deportations and things of that nature. All that does is incite the other side. And you don't need that right now. You know, if you're trying to mend the fences, stop knocking them down. That's my thing. I think we have, certainly is a threat of recession, but I don't think we can figure that out until we see what the next step is.
Well, I'm not sure. Uh, let's address that. He's changing the geopolitical landscape. Geographically, he's drawn a line around a big chunk of the world that encompasses the U.S., Canada, Greenland, Panama. I mean, he's rethinking and restructuring the box. The way I look at this is a guy that was born shortly after World War II. So, and he remembers those years. And we initiated policies post-war to resurrect Japan and Europe. We used to hear kids are starving in Europe, eat your green beans, kids are starving in Europe. We haven't heard that in 50 years because Europe is fine. And we set up policies to reconstruct Japan. We gave them steel mills, first generation steel mills. We did it to Germany, and we lived through the years where German manufacturing, because we couldn't compete with them. U.S. Steel could not compete with the steel mills that came up after post-war, World War II. Trump is looking at the world and saying, okay, we set up a trade policy to rebuild different parts of the world. And that was 50, 70 years ago. We don't need that anymore. They're fine. They're standing on their own 2 feet. So I'm going to redraw the world geostrategically. I'm going to redraw our Defense Department so that it puts an iron dome around our zone and divides other zones. And he's looking at reshuffling the world. And we're still looking at short-term implications here. And he's really reconstructing the post-war world. He's recreating the world for the next 50 to 70 years. There was a Star Trek one time where this alien group invaded the Star Trek, and they moved so fast that Kirk and none of them really knew what these people. They just thought there was something wrong with the material. They'd bring Scotty up. Whoa, I cannot do it, Captain. And they'd have this big argument. But these aliens were moving so fast. Well, our time zones are different. We're traders. We're looking at things from minute to minute, maybe hour to hour, sometimes day to day, and really in strange circumstances, week to week. This guy's thinking, he's thinking in terms of the next 10 decades. And we haven't adjusted to that. And it's really a strange
He
environment.
brought that up a couple of weeks ago when he talked about, somebody asked him about his policies. He says we have to think like the Japanese. They think in centuries. We think in
The
quarters.
Chinese or the Japanese?
The Chinese, I'm sorry. He says they think in centuries, we think in quarters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, when you think about it, I mean, when in his first term, he redid NAFTA, right? So, and I think had he gotten the second term, he probably would have had a continuation. What's happened is, things went awry from his first term, and now he's trying to rebuild the things that he feels were broken during the previous administration. But again, we grew up, and to take Timmy's point, we grew up in an era where politics was done in the back room. Now maybe the advent of social media has thrown that away. You can't, everybody's on their TikTok and their Instagram and then whatever else they're doing. Everybody's got a cell phone in their hand. But, so everything is out there. So we hear everything and we react to everything. That's why the markets go crazy, because they're reacting to every single thing. I don't have a problem with the president setting up our country for the next 70 years, because I'm thinking in terms of my grandchildren and their children. And my great-grandchildren, if we want to say that, although I have none yet. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that, because we will still receive or reap the benefits of that as it has. But, the comments that are made, is there anything wrong with exhibiting a little pain initially to have a better program moving forward? Is there anything wrong with that?
I don't think he's looking to inflict pain on anyone. I think he's just looking to cut fraud and waste. And who does that inflict pain on? I think if you can cut out all the fraud and waste, there's more money available to the people who need it. So maybe I'm looking at it with rose-colored glasses. Maybe I'm being very simplistic, but the other side sees it. It's just pain. People are being laid off. Billionaires are taking care of one another. I don't know.
I mean, I thought the funniest thing I heard was when people were going crazy over being asked by Elon Musk, what 5 things have you accomplished? I mean, now again, as Timmy said, we're thinking with our minds as traders. Weren't you asked by your senior management all the time, how are you doing? How are you doing? What do you mean you lost $10,000 yesterday? I mean, it was all micromanaging, but, tell me what you did. Tell me the last 5 things you've done. Oh, you haven't done anything? You're fired.
And then the reason why he did that, so they'd get an email response to know which emails were real, right? That was his response. I don't care what you did or what you didn't do. Just send me an email back so I know it's a viable email.
Yeah.
So,
But we're not
yeah.
used to that. That's the problem. We're not used to it.
On another note, Lutnick was talking about the gold green card, and he made some noise yesterday about how many was sold. Was it 1,000 that was sold? He said
I didn't see that.
there was a number that he put on it yesterday about how many gold green cards have already been sold. So that's thinking outside of the box. Now
That's $5 billion, right?
it's
$5 billion.
something like that. Yeah, yeah. If that's the number, I don't know if that was the number or not. I got to go back and look at it. But the liberals are going to say, well, he's just importing rich people, and it's more oligarchs, and it's more billionaires coming into the country. But I think you need to see some of that capital infused, and you're thinking of ways to solve bigger problems. Got to give him credit for that.
Well, again, everything he does, if you're a conservative or a Republican, you cheer. Everything he does, if you're a liberal Democrat, you sneer at. I think that's the ongoing problem, the continuing problem. I mean, his excuse me, it wasn't a State of the Union address, but it was the address he did in front of Congress showed how terribly divided we are, extremely divided, to the fact that liberal journalists were deriding him for acknowledging a cancer survivor, acknowledging a young man who made West Point. I mean, these are all, every president does that. You stick the gallery with happy things that you can applaud, and one half of the Senate doesn't applaud those things. That has nothing to do with anything. Obviously the people didn't applaud. They didn't applaud. They don't like him. Let's face it. Although you see his ratings are okay. They don't, right now, the majority of the people who don't like him, because we only have a 47% approval rating, 53% of the people don't approve or don't answer.
This country's been split. I mean, the election of 2000 should have pointed out to anybody, when you got a country this size that's separated by 300 popular votes. I mean, that says it all to me. So we've been polarized for years, and we've got a media that thrives on that. The more polarized they are, the better off they are. I don't know if we ever made this point on this podcast, but when news became a profit center, it became worthwhile. I mean, the days before there was CNN, we used to say, a 24-hour news station? How are you? So you got to create news, and you got to play to your audience. If you're a profit center, you do what earns you profit. And the more they can incite their audience on both sides, the more profitable they're going to be.
I remember after '08, I was reading Dennis Gartman, and he was talking about the stock market selling off and the sell-off. And he says the stock markets are going to stop selling off when you can go to a bar in the afternoon and they have ESPN on and not CNBC on. He says, when people stop staring at those screens and looking at the number on the bottom, and they go back to watching a basketball game, then we'll be okay.
Multimedia now, social media, all of this stuff, it's so prevalent, it's always there. You can do all your banking on your phone, you can do all your stock trading on your phone, you can do everything. And going back to the media, we grew up in the age of Walter Cronkite, Chet Huntley, and David Brinkley. You know, people you could trust. All right,
Yeah, but we really shouldn't have trusted them, but we did.
but we did.
We were naive.
I mean, I remember I remember the line from the American president when Michael Douglas is talking about Richard Benjamin, and he says, we grew up in a time when it was a quiet America, it was a different America, and now people just want to tell you not what they can do to fix it, but what the other guy's doing that's doing it wrong, and everybody made a whole big stink back in 2016. How can a businessman run for president? And I still believe, that Mark Burnett went to Donald Trump and said, listen, I got a great idea for a TV show. Why don't you run for president? You're not going to get the nomination. No, I'm very serious. But just imagine how great this would have been, seeing on the inside what it was like to run for president. And then the night of then all of a sudden, as it got more and more and more, Mark Burnett turned around to Donald Trump and said, holy crap, you're winning.
That's right.
And then what about the TV show? No, nobody would believe we even did, and they never did it. But I still believe that was the whole thing. It was, I won't say it was done on a dare, because I think Donald Trump always had the thought about wanting to be president, and why shouldn't he? There's nothing wrong with that. Right. I mean, the Prime Minister of Canada now is a central banker. He's not a politician, but he became the Prime Minister of Canada because he had a stronger personality to deal with Donald Trump. And I'm convinced, and that's why Claudia Sheinbaum became the president of Mexico, because she was less combative than AMLO was. And I think he, as silly as it sounds, that's why I believe if the three of them sat in a room together, they could fix this whole Canadian, Mexican, U.S. nonsense. And I'll tell you, I went to a hockey game on Saturday night. The Nashville Predators played the Toronto Maple Leafs, and I was concerned, because I was going to be very embarrassed if Nashville booed Canada. But I don't believe they did it. I think part of it had to do with the fact that it was military, salute the military week, so there was a lot of military in the stands. And it was funny, the Toronto fans who were there all sang "Oh Canada." And nobody sings the national anthem when you go to a hockey game. They just stand and wait. The Americans sang Star Spangled Banner that night, and I think they did it in response to Toronto. And that's good. That's a good thing. Civic pride, national pride. You don't boo a national anthem.
Let me take this someplace else here. We talk a lot macro, so let's take the drone up to about 50 or 100,000 feet and look down. I read a book years ago that stuck with me, and I think he was really probably the smartest guy in the world. His name was Alvin Toffler, and he wrote Future Shock, and then another book he wrote was called The Third Wave. And he wrote The Third Wave sometime in the 80s. And what he said was that civilizations evolve in waves. And the first wave is always agricultural. Society learns how to feed itself. And the second wave is industrial. And that's really a refinement of the first wave. We're still growing stuff, but we're doing it with machines. And we're building stuff with machines. And we grew up in the industrial wave. And the third wave he laid out, now this is in the 80s, pre-internet. He said, the third wave is technological. And these waves don't intersect. They overlap. And sometimes you're in two waves at the same time. And the last time they overlapped in America, the industrial wave took over the agricultural wave, and that was the Civil War. You had a society that was fighting to remain agricultural against an emerging industrial wave. So since I read that book, I've been looking at things in that term. I think we're probably moving into the fourth wave now, which is artificial intelligence. But looking at the third wave, you're born in 1990, 2000. You're in the technological civilization. So these, we used to look at kids and say, well, this generation, that's different. We don't just have a generational divide anymore. We have a civilizational divide. We got people born that are 25 years old, they were born in 2000, 35 years old, they were born in 1990. We got people that were born into a technological age, not the industrial age that we grew up in. And the world is different for them than us. Everybody believes that the world started the day they were born. And these kids can't look back at the years that we did, just like we couldn't look back on our grandfathers and imagine what it was like, in the roaring 20s and earlier than that. So these kids, they don't see things the way we see things. They're looking at a whole different paradigm, a whole different civilization. And if you take the investment community, you've got the baby boomers and the long-term investors and the people that are trying to preserve their capital into these kids who grew up on their phones. We got a whole different civilization that we have to look at here. And we can't look at things through our eyes anymore, our old industrial eyes. We have to look at through technological eyes. And I think we lose sight of that. And I think, to me, that explains some of the chaos and craziness. They're perfectly fine with people setting fire to Teslas. They think that's how you evolve. You take over a university, no problem. You wear a mask. University says you can't do it. We don't really give a shit. This is what we're going to do. So I think we have to adjust to that level of societal change.
Anarchy?
What do you think, Fred?
Would you call it anarchy? That level of anarchy?
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's true. To your point about the younger generation is so comfortable with technology. Something that always stuck me was a photo of a baby, and it's got to go back 15 years, maybe more, of a baby looking at a magazine trying to spread the picture. Right? Magazine doesn't spread. Well, on your phone, it's very easy. You spread the picture.
Think
So
about this. Ask your grandchildren, okay? Because I've had these conversations with my grandchildren. I have 3 teenage grandchildren, 1 grandson over 20, and 4 little ones. But ask your grandchildren what they think it would be like to have to constantly get up and change the channel. I always used to use that in class. The fact that nobody thinks twice about a remote. Nobody thinks twice about the fact that, can you imagine a phone ringing and you have no idea who the person is on the other side before you pick up the phone? I mean, think about these things. So technology has changed the world, obviously, and it's changed the thinking of the world. And those people, your 1990 people, all right, your 1990 births, are now eligible not only to vote, obviously, but to run for president. So think about that. These are people half the age of us that this could be your next president. I mean, look at J.D. Vance, a really relatively young man.
Or AOC.
Well, AOC.
They listen to her and they think she's logical. I listen to her and I want to scratch my head and say, if your IQ hits 100, sell with both hands. You're never going to see the price of it.
And yet, if looking at a market, you'd have to buy AOC U.S. Senator calls because she's going to be. Am I right or wrong?
just talking about her primarying Schumer.
Yeah, what?
Letitia James.
Yeah, I mean, we think these people are lunatics, whereas the younger generation embrace them.
Yeah, just talk about AOC primarying Schumer.
Yeah. Well,
Schumer is really Mr. Burns from The Simpsons, because I've never seen them both in the same room at the same time.
he's I heard him on Meet the Press this weekend, and he's staying adamant about what he's done and how he's done it. He's not stepping down. He's just that, but he will be replaced. I mean, there's no doubt. The groundswell, he will be replaced. Again, he voted to keep the government open. So somebody has to explain to me what was wrong with that, because I'm an old man now, and I missed that point. He voted to keep the government open. Help me, please, boys.
Well,
Really?
to be honest, the Republicans did that, and that's what got the previous speaker ousted, right?
Exactly.
So it's from both sides.
I mean, right. The previous speaker said use common sense, And now he runs a drugstore. So, no, I don't know what he does, but and this guy, Chuck Schumer's been around forever, and Chuck Schumer has been a beacon of people. I don't always agree with his politics, but I respect him, and I don't.
Schumer?
Yeah, I don't always agree with his politics. I respect the fact that he thinks he's no. I mean, he's
I don't respect Schumer at all because I think he's a weather vane. He goes with whatever they tell him,
but
whichever
he
way the
doesn't.
polls tell him to go. He has no substance. He has no substance in him.
I don't know if you remember this, but I'll never forget this. Right after 9/11, one of the news stations had Hillary Clinton and Chuck Schumer on at the same time. And the comment was, this is after, President Bush had showed up at Ground Zero and everything like that. And they both turned around and said, thank God for President Bush. And I almost fell off my chair. And so now, what is this, 24 years later? He's voting with his conscience. And don't get me wrong, I vote for anybody against Chuck Schumer. I'm not voting for Chuck Schumer. I don't want you to, I'm just saying, sometimes common sense kicks you in the rear end.
This is why the aliens are laughing their ass off.
Yeah, exactly. That's why we're safe. They're not coming down here because they want to get infected.
Yeah,
So
why would they want to interact with us?
Exactly. Should we go and attack this planet? No. Let's go see what's doing on Mars eventually. There's got to be something underneath.
Yeah, we don't want to. They're too stupid to live.
It's the old bit that guy did in the 70s. Oh, they're watching Mr. Whipple squeeze the Charmin. Right?
I Love Lucy. I mean, this is Jerry Springer. We're in a Jerry Springer show.
Yeah,
It is funny, but I watch these news shows sometimes, and it's just they don't make sense a lot of times. They bring on these people speaking, exactly what they're going to speak. I understand. You bring on the Democratic person, then you bring on the Republican person, and then, the commentator's always trying to catch the person. Like, will you vote whatever the president says? No, I'll vote what makes sense. But,
This is why Reagan was so good. They watched Reagan one time. I watched him one time, and somebody said, you said this. And he said, and they quoted him, and he said, I was a Democrat back then. I said a lot of stupid things.
yeah. He was. I mean, he
He
was.
was so good at disarming his opponents, and Trump lacks that. Trump really doesn't have that.
Well, I talk to friends and on both sides of the political fence, and I have the utmost respect for the president. I voted for the president, and I think he's doing some good things. I think he's trying to do too many things too fast, but I don't think that is a bad thing. I think that he's just trying too hard. But my biggest complaint about Donald Trump is very simple. Very simple. Stop talking. Just stop talking. Let your actions go. Stop talking. We don't have to hear from you every single minute. Because if you talk too many times, you end up saying sometimes foolish things. Don't make a comment that we didn't lower interest rates 2 weeks ago. We didn't. You put that guy in position in that job. Let him do his job. Period.
And he's selected such a strong cabinet that you want to hear from these people. They're all good. I mean, they're really.
Yeah,
This is as good a cabinet as I've ever seen.
Like I said, he doesn't need to make comments every day, and I don't have a problem with him being on social media, but not every minute of the day. You set up tariffs, and let it play out. The whole idea of the tariffs, in my opinion, was to set up negotiation. Well, if you keep talking about it, you're going to only anger the people you need to negotiate with.
Yeah. If I were president, I would put Kristi Noem and Melania in a Wonder Woman contest every time I spoke.
Freddie,
money in the side. Yeah.
just imagine the cabinet positions we would have if he was president.
Listen, if I were king, I would make everybody wear their underwear on the outside. That's the first thing I would do. And dogs would wear underwear too. That's another thing.
Is there anything wrong with seeing Kristi Noem walk, horseback riding on the Mexican border wearing a cowboy hat? I don't have a problem with that.
I could work on that.
Yeah.
Right. She's done
All
well.
right. I think I'm coming against my hard stop here.
Yeah.
It was great to talk to you again. It's a great technological advance so that we could talk to one another and enjoy the sickness that we've enjoyed over the years.
All right, everybody. Thanks very much for your time, gents.
Thanks
Have a
for
good
having me,
day.
guys. I appreciate it. Timmy, be well.
Okay.
Pretty thanks.